Kia ora, Internet.
Hello and welcome to the Sky Bear Games podcast.
Episode 17. My lucky number.
Oh yeah.
And this is a topic we promised a while ago, and then life got in the way and things and stuff, and also bronchitis. We are going to be talking about GM tips.
Cool.
This is James's tips for immersion, for getting your players role-playing, encouraging them, because it's quite hard to role-play.
It
Like,
is.
actually role-play to get deep into your character.
Yeah. It's nice to have some stuff to break the ice.
Yeah. Now, depending on your game system, your game might well have some mechanics that help to draw that out, but a lot of games leave it to the players, or they have fairly anemic systems, like Dungeons & Dragons does. And so these are just some tips that I've got to help encourage it and draw it out a bit more.
Nice.
So the first one is one that I used to do when I was running Adventurers League games in the local game store. It's a pretty standard thing to, go around the table and get everyone to introduce themselves and say who their character is. And when you do, everyone will say, I am a dwarven fighter. I am an elf wizard. But that's not really who you are. The characters in the world have no idea what it means to be a barbarian as opposed to a fighter. All they know is that they like being violent and that they get very angry when they do. They wouldn't call themselves a fighter. They wouldn't call themselves a rogue. So what I got the players to do was I asked them to introduce themselves, introduce their characters, without mentioning their class and their race. And it's got people thinking about, how do you introduce yourself normally to people around you? How would your characters introduce themselves? This was just a nice little icebreaker to just get the ball rolling, get them thinking about role-playing a bit more. And from that, I was able to draw more out of them over the course of the rest of the adventure, which was really satisfying and really rewarding.
I really like that. I feel like it helps systems that, say, like Pendragon, for example, you have to do that anyway, because you're all knights.
Yeah,
you're all the same class.
Yeah, if you say, I'm a knight of Salisbury, then, well, you're all knights of Salisbury.
Yeah, we all are. So what makes you special? And then you have to go into who your family is, what skills you bring to the table.
Yeah, where you're from, what your famous personality trait is.
So bringing that sort of differentiation into systems that don't have it is a lot more fun. Introduce yourself.
So that's number one, is introduce yourselves, but in a slightly more interesting and realistic way.
Wonderful. I like that. What's next?
It's just meant to be a very simple one. The next one is one that I learnt from Pendragon. It is just to ask your players, how do they feel? A lot of role-playing games don't have rules for emotional reactions to things, but as people, we know that we will react to things emotionally. Some things will make us angry, some things will make us sad, some things will make us thoughtful. I think it's a really good thing, just at big, dramatic or important moments, to just stop and ask the players, how do their characters feel right now?
Right.
And of course, Pendragon mechanically rewards you for having an emotional response if you're feeling angry or vengeful or prudent or reckless or temperate or whatever.
Or it can also help you make the role-play decision if you're having trouble deciding. You can go to your dramatic polls and you can figure out, I as a player feel this way, but what does my character feel? Well, they're cautious versus reckless. They're far more reckless. So, okay, I think they're going to say some harsh words and maybe escalate the situation here.
But this is also something that you can do in other games like Dungeons & Dragons. I think in D&D you run more of a risk of people having a single emotion or a couple of emotions that they'll hammer strongly. But that's a pretty good place to start off with. And then from there you can try and draw out other emotions. You can get them to identify, I feel this when this sort of thing happens.
Yeah, and you can build on that.
Yeah. But it's the easiest tool of all. And it's one of the most human ones, is how do you feel? And also for Dungeons & Dragons, one of the things I've always felt with it is there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in a game of D&D. There's a lot of, there's magic and there's monsters and there's locations that the mind cannot comprehend and all of these things. And so responding to them like a normal human being helps to restore that sense of wonder when you see an impressive sight on the plains, or horror when you discover dead bodies that the cultists have sacrificed, or when a wizard casts a big spell. And so that can help to just sort of ground and emphasise some of the big things that are going on.
Number 2, how do you feel? I like it.
Yeah, very simple, but yeah, it's a good one. So my third one is something that we've had quite a lot of fun with, and it's actually one that 5th edition does support. We're talking about D&D a lot in this, but of course that is the baseline. It's what most people play. A lot of people. And it is...
And frankly, I think it is our key audience for this, because...
I think it is the audience for role-playing, really.
Well, no, but what I mean is specifically for you want to bring more immersion to your role-play.
Yeah.
Because a lot of other systems support more immersive role-play, whereas it has long been a struggle for D&D.
When you've got games like, say, Fate, where you've got your aspects that you're constantly referring to and drawing out, it becomes much easier to roleplay. When you've got Pendragon, where you've got an entire cross-reference grid for personalities, it becomes very easy. What do the characters get up to in their day-to-day life?
Yeah.
So, 5th edition has mechanics for downtime, which can let them run a business, or go carousing, or go shopping, or what have you. Yeah, all the stuff in between adventures, but there's also the stuff that happens during the adventures. I remember one session where I freaked out my players by providing them the menu at an inn that they went to and asking them what they wanted to eat.
It was so funny. Oh, looking back, it's crack up.
And that is actually one of the risks of this, is that whatever you describe a lot, the players are going to think is very, very important.
Yeah.
So
because of the way that box text operates,
Whereas all I wanted to do was food in particular is such a massively important cultural activity. So thinking about what sorts of foods are available can really set the scene for a culture, for a place, for a time. Thinking about the way in which your party has their food and the sort of culture that they have around eating. Thinking about the different mannerisms. Do people make light conversation? Do they use cutlery? Are they very dainty? Do they rip in and just start throwing food down their mouth? Do they talk with their mouth full? There's such a range of behaviour around eating. But it's not the only thing that you can do. Any sort of normal day-to-day activity. I mean, maybe you don't want to follow your characters into the bathroom.
At the same time, when they're setting up camp, making sure that someone sets up the latrines could be an important security measure. I was going to just add to this point. Quite often what I see happening, especially on online roleplay with this, especially in Dungeons & Dragons specifically, is people using downtime as like an excuse to just go like, oh, I train. And that's boring. What we are offering here is like expand it right out to encompass the wider world of what you do.
What are your hobbies? There was a wonderful question in the Legend of the Five Rings RPG, which uses 20 questions to create your character. And one of the questions was, if your character got given 1 koku, which is a large sum of money, what would they spend it on? What does your character do for relaxation? And you can also think about what are your character's living arrangements like. So in our Planescape game, I got you to describe your house, and then you also got to flesh out the little local neighbourhood, the tavern where you go for meals, some of the people who go there. We had a whole session which was just you spending time in Sigil.
So that you just reminded me of one of my favourite sessions ever from one of my favourite campaigns ever.
Is it Mage?
Yeah, you knew already where I was going with
I knew where you were going with this one.
So my friend Jackie invited me to take part in a old mage. If you know the White Wolf systems at all, you'll know that there's old versions of the books and new versions of the books. So this was old mage, which I still to this day don't really know a lot about the differences between them. But anyway, she let me design my character and everything, and then we all came together, and I can't remember if it was the first or maybe the second session, we got to design where we lived. Or more specifically, because it was like the building existed already. It was sort of like an old building in central Auckland, sort of similar to like the old railway station, right? So you get the sort of idea of like it's a New Zealand Victorian building, something very old, reused and reused over the years, and so it would have a certain type of architecture to it. Lots of stairways and hallways and stuff. So instead of really designing the architecture, it was more that we were designing our security. So we got to set up all sorts of things of how we would monitor our safety. I can't really remember what was going on in the campaign, except that safety was really important. We were trying to protect ourselves from something. But yeah, so I remember that I was my two most powerful skills, I think, were matter and spirit. So I would like make little robots and then put little guardian spirits in them that would then act as my little drones around the house.
Every time you say this, I want to play Ars Magica with you.
Yeah, well, I want to play Ars Magica, so...
When we've got the time.
Yeah.
Once we've finished off a few more games.
Yeah. So yeah, that was one that has stuck with me. That was 2013, so like, it stuck with me for 8 years. And it just goes to show, like, the power of letting the players imagine what their everyday looks like, imagine what the surroundings look like for you, which plays a little bit into...
Yeah, this reminds me of one more thing, before I take that lovely hook that you gave me. I just remembered in the starter set for Warhammer 4th Edition from Cubicle 7, one of the characters, the Halfling, has the personality trait that they don't like to sleep alone. She just likes cuddling with people. And isn't that a wonderful personality trait? And it makes you think about what sort of rituals do you, the player, have about going to bed? Well, what sort of rituals do your characters have? True. Wouldn't it be cute to be a gnome with a teddy bear? Does your character like to read a book or do something to sort of calm them down before they get ready for bed? And yeah, there's a lot of those things that can really just help to bring a character to life. Anyway, what you said just before leads us beautifully into our next point, which is co-constructivism.
It's my favourite thing.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. So if you haven't come across this concept before, what it is it's about sacrificing a bit of narrative control to the players and getting them to come up with a lot of the stuff that traditionally the Dungeon Master would invent. It can really help to increase player buy-in to the world and the characters and what's going on.
The other thing it does conversely is if as a GM you only really know sort of the skeleton of the story in your head,
you can get the players to fill in the details.
They fill it in and give you more ideas of exactly how what your meta plot is will come to fruition in the end.
This sort of narrative control is something that a lot of role-playing games are including more and more in them, either with having shared GM duties, or by having story points which let the players spend them to affect the plot, or by having the games which are like Fiasco, which are GM-less, where they completely give co-constructivism to the players. But you can do it even in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, which has no rules for and expects it to be a very traditional Dungeon Master and players format. One example that I like is if the players go into a town and they say what they want to do, then get them to decide who the people are that they meet. So if they say, oh, we want to look out for a map maker in this town. Cool, tell me about the map maker. And you can give them some prompts if you need to, rather if they don't feel like coming up with them all on the spot. You can say, okay, so what's their race? And they can say, oh, it's a blue dragonborn. Great. What's their, give me a personality trait. Oh, they're really fussy. Cool, we've got this fussy blue dragonborn that the players have just come up with. And then you ask the player at the end of the table, what's their name? Oh, it's Cedric. Great. There we go. Cedric, the fussy blue dragonborn cartographer, is suddenly this character that your players are really invested in.
And so many times I see GMs, saying what they spend a lot of their time doing is looking on their random tables for random names because, hey, who would have thought my players have wandered off away from my plot?
Yeah, and now I need to come up with a random character suddenly.
Yeah.
Well, rather than you coming up with the random character because you never thought they were going to need a cartographer, throw it back on the players.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then watch as they suddenly become really invested in Cedric, the fussy cartographer. I'm really invested in Cedric, the fussy dragonborn cartographer.
That's the funny thing, right? Like, one of the most resonating things for me in the whole of Ravenloft, so much so that it tricked me towards the end and made me think that it was in the book all along, was our invented character, Radovan.
Yeah, and that was the character I got you to fill in a lot of the details for.
We pulled a name from out of the random charts in the book, and then we just made up all the other things about him and made him up as we went along. So, there you go.
And he wound up feeling he felt like he was more a part of the plot than just about every single one of the official characters.
I mean, he basically became Mr. Barovia in the end.
Yeah, in the end, he took over after Strahd was defeated. And that was something really cool, and you were so invested in because he was a character that you had created.
Yeah.
Similarly, there was a Pendragon adventure where the knights stopped off in a town.
Oh, yeah. This is a good one.
And they all wanted to ask people who were there about, I think it was information about Pictor charades.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So I didn't have details about who the people were in this town. And so I got each of the players to describe who the person was that they had met. And so we got Tad, the former knight. I think he had been crippled. We had a blacksmith. We had all these different... I think there was a carpenter. All these different characters got created for this little mini scene where each of the knights got to interact with them and ask them a few questions and get some information out of them. And then when the adventure went absolutely off the rails later on, they crossed the wall, some bad dice rolls, some questionable decisions happened, and the players suddenly found themselves captured. Well, being captured is something that can really take the agency away from players. But in this case, I got them to play as the characters they had just invented before and go and rescue themselves. And they really enjoyed it.
It's something to indulge in only to the level of your comfort. So it's something that I am extremely comfortable with, given the right set of right set of players. So back in the day, when I last ran a campaign for more than just James, we would go all out. Like, I
remember one session you just gave us a box of Lego and told us to make things with it, and everything we made got worked into the plot.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of fun.
The one before that, I had... You guys were on the trail of a character, and the mechanism for finding out more about him was that I had a hat with slips of paper in it, and when you went and asked someone about it, another person, not me, another person would play the character that you were interviewing. And oh my god, there were some hilarious characters there.
We almost lost the entire campaign just because we were having so much fun being these random characters and coming up with these random stories.
Specifically, I remember the secretary and the police chief. They were hilarious. And the two old ladies knitting who had elaborate hairstyles.
And a octopus on.
We had a shark soft toy and an octopus soft toy nearby, and so the two players playing these old ladies
put them on their heads as their hairdos.
And there they were knitting, and they were gossiping about this man that the players were on the trail of, and we were laughing so hard. It was just the most derailing thing. No, yeah, like not every GM wants that sort of thing, so it really is about the tone you're trying to set.
But I think the easiest way to do it is either if your players go off the road and they need some information that you don't have, then get them to provide it. Otherwise, if there's something really important, get them to fill in the details and you can have questions prepared for them, which is what you did. You had particular prompts that you wanted us to answer about parts of this character's backstory. I just remembered another great example as well, which was from that same store game that I did.
Oh, yeah?
So after we'd done some Adventurers Leagues, we then ran an in-store campaign, which was actually the original Dragons of Tyrrhenia campaign. And one of the characters who had to be really important, they were a mercenary company. And we had an NPC who was the captain of their mercenary company who could send different tables of players off on different quests. So this was a character they had to buy into. So, I told them that they had this captain, and I got them all to tell me one fact about him.
Oh, cool.
And as a result, they loved the captain.
Yeah,
and there were times where to move the sort of meta plot along, we had to have a little bit of NPC theatre. They did not mind, because as far as they were concerned, that was their captain that they had created. Yeah. And then in the end, when the giant twist came, that he was in fact a silver dragon. Oh, they were so happy though. Yeah.
I remember that. So just coming to the end of this point, I thought I'd point out that if this all sounds very exciting to you and you're going, hey, can I, get some more of this in my games rather than less of it, and you find yourself heading towards the more like improv spectrum of role-playing rather than the more standard, very structured stuff. Some games to try out are Fiasco, Doe, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and The Fall of Magic. Those are just a few. Have you got any, James?
Everway is an extremely obscure RPG that I had not heard of before today when I bought a second-hand copy of it.
Oh.
It is supposed to be... The reviews from the time were, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but how can any group possibly deal with having to be so creative all the time?
Oh!
I'm really excited, and we might be cancelling all our plans to run this once it arrives.
This sounds exactly like it's my jam.
So the resolution system, in some ways it's very traditional, but in other ways, the resolution system is a series of tarot-inspired cards. And so, depending on their orientation, it's got a different result. But it's up to you and your players to interpret what that actually means. I believe they've got the tarot symbols in them, they've got star signs, they've got numerological aspects in them, and you just choose which thing, and as long as you can say, well, I see this on the card, so I think that this is how this task would be resolved, you can do whatever you want with it.
Are we getting a copy of the deck?
Yeah. It's still sealed.
How obscure is this?
This is apparently the first thing that Wizards of the Coast put out as a role-playing game. It's by the guy who did On the Edge, which I've heard is another role-playing game we need to get. I think he might have done Ars Magica as well.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
And I'm pretty sure he got roped in to help with D&D 3rd edition.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know, when you think about it's a bit sort of mechanically old today, as far as I'm concerned, but when you think about the huge advancement from 2nd to 3rd edition.
Big time.
Jonathan Tweet, I think his name is.
Okay.
Anyway, very excited for this game, and you will hear more. Maybe we'll do an unboxing video.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I'm excited. Okay.
Anyway.
That was number 4. Some light co-constructive elements can help
Yeah.
boost the immersion.